over the years I've found people who have close encounters, they report all these after effects. But in recent years I've been hearing from more of them about being able to see dead people and speak. They start with the glossolalia, with this speaking the strange languages that they call star language, but it seems to be a form of glossolalia. There is no language construct in it. There's been a growing prevalence of reports of people who have close encounters saying that they've been able to see the dead. Now that may not be increasing, it may just be that I've become more aware of it, and I think that's probably the majority of the cases. So that got me interested in what other experiences that people can have that sort of catalyse these mediumship in people. And then recently I was watching a conference talk by Dr. Jan Holden. I'll talk about it later, but she was talking about spontaneous mediumship experiences. So my idea of mulling things through, and obviously this isn't the be-all and end-all of the subject because I'm just sharing with you as I'm learning myself, is that she found that people who had near-death experiences had an increase in spontaneous mediumship experiences. So I'm thinking that maybe often we hear people saying that we all have these abilities and they get triggered by certain experiences, and then these sorts of faculties, abilities begin. And it's not a surprise that a lot of mediums that I've spoken to have told me that they've had a near-death experience when they were younger. And for those of you who know Glenys, that's the case with her. She had a near-death experience, she drowned when she was a child. And if you're interested in some of her experiences, we interviewed her, and her interview's up on our Strange Encounters Down Under YouTube channel. And she's got a lot of things that have happened to her. But so I wanted to talk about mediums in general, really, because a medium, if you think about it, a medium is something or someone that something expresses itself through. So when we're talking about artists, they express themselves through mediums, pastels, crayons, paints, acrylics, oils, all that sort of stuff. So it's something that something gets expressed through. And of course when we're talking about the dead, it's about the dead expressing themselves and communicating through another person. Now, I was going to say something about that. Oh yes, in the Middle Ages this was called witchcraft, of course. And today fundamentalist Christian groups, they think it's all the devil, but I think these are actually quite normal faculties, and I think probably, having spoken to many of you, you probably think similar sorts of things. So there are different ways, different types of mediumship. But let's just start with Aldous Huxley, and we know who he is. He was a philosopher, an author, and he wrote about the paranormal amongst many other things. And he said, there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. So there are, sometimes the things that are unknown to, or that space between, that borderland space, or that borderline world, that we know and we don't know, depends on our perception of it. Okay, so that's my thinking anyway, that we have a perceptual framework, and it works in physical reality, but I think it also works in non-physical reality too. And according to your favourite word, Terry, frequency, which we'll get to in the end before you bring it up.
I'm happy you're going to say it.
Yeah. But really, which is about energy, and that can be, if you backspace that, it could be knowledge, because all knowledge has energy. So, and as we take knowledge in, it changes our frequency and our resonance, and then we start to resonate to different things because we know something now, we're aware of it, we've awakened, as Barry was saying to me earlier today. So, and that awakening and that growing awareness changes the dial on our radar. So suddenly things start to, we pay attention to things that we didn't pay attention to before. But there are experiences that we can have that can cause that to happen too. One of them is close encounters with extraterrestrials that people report anyway. What they are, I don't know, or that's what they think they are. But in regard to mediumship, you have physical mediumship. So, you have things like ectoplasm revealing itself. In this case, in a lot of those cases in the past, they were frauds. They were actually cheesecloth that was hanging down. Lots of hoaxing was going on, but there were some cases that were real. You have things like noises and voices that people hear. Apports is a really good one because there's, and I might have told you before, but there's that case that you've probably heard of Skull, the Skull experiment. And in that particular case, there were many apports that appeared, but one of them, which impressed me and I've always remembered, was a newspaper that smacked down on the table in front of the people who were sitting there. It made a noise, it had a physical component to it, and it was not of the era. It was not of the times. Okay, so that newspaper presented itself from some other realm, basically, and that was documented in front of a large group of scientists. And you can look that up on the Skull experiment on I think it's called Afterlife Investigations or something on YouTube. That's a great documentary. But those things that appear from non-ordinary realms are evidence of something that those sitters are helping to bring through. So in that way they're acting like mediums. And I was interested to hear that Robin Foy, who was the lead sort of medium in that particular experiment, which went on over 5 years, they sat weekly to bring these beings through. And he said, just as an aside, he said that these entities will use your energy, they'll use their energy, but they'll also use earth energies. So, and they'll combine the three energies together to be able to manifest things. I guess that makes sense, isn't it? Because if you use earth energy, you're talking about material reality, and that's the way that you can have these physical objects appear. I don't understand that, but I'm just thinking that. Then you have materialization. So you have you can have apparitions. Again, you can have all types of things that will materialize, and spirit photography. So these are all sort of evidence of physical mediumship. And yes,
what's apports?
Apports are the physical objects, like the newspaper. Apports are physical things that will appear from seemingly out of the blue. So they can be like in the Skull experiment, they had pennies, they had pin ties, cufflinks, they had just trying to think what else they had, but there are objects that appear out of non-physical realms, basically, and they materialize in physical form, and they've still got the collection of things that appeared out of those realms. Some of those other things that appeared were signatures on film that was in, and the film wasn't even in a camera, it was in a locked box, which scientists were actually sitting around and observing. So
an Indian fellow with a frizzy haircut used to do that when he shook hands all the time, didn't he?
Oh, Sai Baba?
Yeah.
Yes, he used to. Yes, you've heard of Sai Baba, and he used to, on his ashram. I know someone. Actually, I must ask him to come and be a speaker. I'm just thinking of Peter. He was it him? Anyway, there was someone I knew who went to Sai Baba's ashram, and Sai Baba was a master over in India, and he manifested a ring and gave it to this, I think it was this fellow that I know, last I saw, he said, I've still got the ring, and it was it wasn't a ruby, it was a garnet. It was a garnet ring. So anything like something like that that can be manifested from a non-ordinary realm is an apport. Okay. Yeah. And they can appear in very strange places. When we were at the Paracon down in Katoomba 3 years ago, we heard Dr. Tony Jinks talking about things that can manifest, and one of them was someone had a woman, wasn't it? A pearl manifested in her ear. She found it in her ear. And someone else had an amethyst crystal that just out of the sky just popped down on the ground.
These are not magicians, eh?
No, these are ordinary people having these strange experiences. Yeah. So yeah, this is not. It's not unusual, but my theory behind this is that those individuals concerned, like us here in this room, are unconscious mediums. Because there are conscious mediums, and we'll get on to that, but there are unconscious mediums, and I think most of us are unconscious to that aspect of ourselves. But we'll get on to that. Spirit channeling, you've seen that before. I love this chair, the image of the chair up in the room. And this, again, this similar thing happened over in Skull. I think Dr. Rupert Sheldrake was there at the time. He was one of the scientists sitting in. And was it crystals on top of the table? And the table lifted up and started spinning round and round and round in the air, you know. So it's pretty spectacular stuff. And other things that happened, well, he was talking in a documentary that I watched, that they had their hands on the table and this hand, just a hand, appeared and it touched his hand. And the sitters there said, talk to the hand. So he said, hello, hand. So he started talking to the hand. And then eventually the hand disappeared because the hand's attached to some sort of entity.
A question.
Yeah.
How would you correlate all that with the Ouija board?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's the next one.
Psychic.
I got the email.
Before we go on to the Ouija board, can I just share something about that?
Please do.
I've done a couple of courses at the Arthur Findlay College in the UK, and one time I was there, we had a physical medium come in, and she sat and she had a scarf on her head, so all of her hair was pulled back away from her face. You could see her face very clearly, and next to her there was a painting or a drawing of her guide, her control. And when she channeled, and he was like an Oriental gentleman, so he had, you know, smaller eyes and he had a moustache. When she was channeling him, I kid you not, her face changed, took on his persona, including the moustache. Yeah, it was something else to behold. And he was passing on personal messages to. There was just a few of us in this big grand library in this you know, big old house. It was amazing.
Well, something similar happened to Glenys Mackay. She actually came to one of our meetings a few years ago, and she showed a photograph, and she was, because she does house clearings as well, and when she walked into this room, this entity sort of took over her. It turned out to be a deceased male who was haunting the house, and in the photo you can see her face looks much more manly. It was like it was trying to inhabit and express itself through her. That's quite a strong presence to be able to manifest changes in the physical form like that. Yeah.
I've had that happen one time, many years ago. I was having a reading from, like a tarot reading, I guess. No, it was a mediumship reading. And it was kind of a semi-dark room, and over this woman's face I saw a Roman centurion's face. It was a bit actually.
Well, you know, I won't even. No, I'll tell you quickly. Just as a side, my friend Sue, who's just gone back to Spain, she had an experience where she saw a reptilian over someone's face. That wasn't pleasant at all. Scared her. She got out of the car. You know.
Was someone she was having a reading with, or just someone that
she drove home with? Gave her a lift home or something. She got out of the car, turned around to say goodbye, and she saw a reptilian face. Now, that person, I think, remained unaware of that. Right, but that opens up a whole Pandora's box of another presentation. But anyway. But getting back to the Ouija board, I do think you have to know what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I purely because I think at any time we can be manoeuvred by beings of the unseen realms. I went for a healing with someone at Tambourine Mountain many years ago, and when I was there laying on the table, my a family member's deceased brother manifested in the room. I was aware of him. The person who was doing the healing on me wasn't aware of him, but she was an advanced healer, I would say, because she taught me many things, but she just wasn't aware of them. And I saw strange things happen. And I saw a violet ray come through the window and shine down on me, and then this small child appeared, and I said, "Do you see that?" And she said, "No, I can't see it." And I said, "I'm aware of that person." She became aware. That's right. She did become aware. Sorry, but she didn't know who it was. And she said, "Who is it?" And I said, "That's my family member's little brother who died." I came home from that healing, and when I came home, I'm standing there cutting things up for dinner, and the clock on the wall just jumped off like that. I saw it jump off, and it didn't fall, just jumped off. And then later on that night, I was having a shower, but I saw, not physically like I would see you, but in my mind, not in my mind's eye, in a see-through fashion, I saw this apparition of this person who was a child, now as a man, standing there leaning against the wall watching me have a shower. But I'm saying, go away. So that's my experience with that sort of spontaneous, I'm not seeking it, it just happens, and lots of other people have lots more pronounced experiences. But in regard to the Ouija board, I see that as a medium for, dead people or non-human intelligences to even come through too.
I saw The Exorcist.
Yeah, didn't we all? No, didn't want to see that. No.
But there are so many bad stories about the Ouija board.
There are a lot of bad stories.
There are a lot of bad stories. Yes.
Probably like that.
The Americans are very finicky about it. Don't play with it, don't play with it.
Yeah. Yes, Dave?
It's probably like, if you drive a car, you should really get trained and have a license. The same thing with your Ouija board. You shouldn't just start off from scratch. You should have somebody who teaches you how to use it.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, well, you're going to a lot of stuff will go wild.
Yeah.
Some of the energies within yourself cause some of that thing probably to happen as well.
You can still get caught out though, even if you think you're doing the right thing, you're using white light and protecting yourself, you can still get caught out. And actually, for once, I agree with Terry, be careful who you do it with.
Yes, as well. Yeah, because I think if someone's has had a negative attitude, that's an imprint in the energetic field around them, and then you're sitting there and opening yourself up to that, and you don't know how that's going to manifest. It could manifest in all sorts of ways, but it could also be used and manipulated by unseen influences, basically.
Absolutely can.
Yes, Marianne.
When I was a teenager, my first experience with a Ouija board was pretty exciting. So everyone there, and they weren't spiritualists, they weren't drinking and nothing, it was just people playing, right? And the surprise was how it moved. And so we were asking questions, and something inside of me said, someone's playing with you. And so I didn't trust the answers. So later on, it comes back into your life every so often. So when my spiritual growth started happening, so I had an event happen where I had a Ouija board, and my best friend and I, we were growing spiritually together. I didn't have a group or didn't go read or anything, and so we were playing with we weren't really playing, we were just communicating, yeah? And the next thing you know, this thing decided to stop, and we couldn't even move it. And it was feeling, and the walls were creaking and stuff. I got, this is not good. So I took it and threw it away. And when I was throwing it away, it got really heavy. It did not want to go. So, but my inner guidance was telling me that you need to learn about this. So my inner guidance told me to get a new one from the store, never been touched by anyone. And so then I blessed it, and I put a candle around it, and white light, and never had any trouble with it. Always got the most high messages from it. But then after a while, with all tools, you've got to let them go. Otherwise, if you depend on it, then you open yourself up to negative messages.
Yeah.
And so I let that go and moved on to my own inner voice and my own inner guidance. But with all tools, every tool, no matter how good it is, no matter how blessed it is, whatever, can be used for the negative. It can bring you, it can bring, because once you depend on something, that's when your vibrations are low, as you would say, you know. But when you start using it on a spiritual level and knowing that all things come from source, then you start getting, and then you know the difference if you're listening to your inner voice. So that was my experience. So yes, I had the bad experiences, the playful experiences, moved into the higher realms. Very beautiful, which got me on my path to love. Because my first message from the higher realms was, you must learn to love. I said, yeah, I love myself. It said, you must learn to love yourself. Yeah, I do. No, you do not love yourself. And it started telling me what I was not doing. So that was my first healing. Actually came through Ouija board.
Yeah, interesting. One of the reasons I think that we hear a lot of negative stories about it is because it's the nature of negative stories, isn't it?
Yes,
negative experiences, people will tend to share that. Although, having said that, people who have near-death experiences don't tend to share as much their negative experiences. You know, because if you go into the near-death research field, it's mostly positive stories, but people do have negative experiences. So, but anyway, and seances too. You know, so these are again, and I think when you're looking at these, you're right, Mariana. I think that these are all tools, and we have abilities to do what people are trying to achieve without those tools. But when we're learning and trying things out, I think tools are something that we rely on. You know, like the driver's handbook when we're learning to drive. But then you eventually learn to drive and you sort of move on. Yeah.
But not only that, maybe it's not a good idea to be using second-hand Ouija boards and second-hand tarot cards. And that sort of thing, because you're picking up other people's things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and spirit photography. And spirit photography, I mean, cameras were only invented in the 1800s. I'm not exactly sure when. And art in the... Does anyone know when cameras came into being? Was it 1840s?
Mid 1800s.
Yeah.
Mid to late 1800s.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there was a guy who was using cameras. Actually, spirit photography was born through a guy called Mumler, M-U-M-L-E-R. And he was taking photographs, and images started to show up on the photographs. Well, word got out and it spread like wildfire, didn't it? And that was the birth of spirit photography. But it is interesting, and these images are in a collection on a website which I've got down here, brightbites.com. So, as I was saying before, mediumship, there's mediums who are voluntary and they can call forth or dial up other entities at will, but there are the natural or unconscious mediums. The unconscious mediumship, I guess you call it, which occurs spontaneously. Obviously that can be frightening to some people, and it does scare them off, and I've got a clip I'm going to play for you of where that happened to somebody. But going back to the spirit photography, there's something called thoughtography too, which is where there was a woman called, oh gosh, what was her name? Isaac in the UFO field. What was it? Isat. Dorothy Isat. And she took a series of photographs of these strange things that would come up. And I think the idea with thought photography is you have to take the consciousness of the person into account when they're producing these images. Now there's some of you might have heard of the Dutch guy Robert van den Broek, who's taken the. He was young when Nancy Talbot, who was a crop circle researcher, and he knew where crop circles would appear in Holland. And as he's gotten older, his abilities seem to have progressed, and some people think he's a charlatan. But he started taking these images of people where the deceased will show up as well. And he works as a medium. So it could be, in his case, and I think it's a similar thing with people who have poltergeist activity, that it actually emits from them. And this is what I'm talking about. These things, people are mediums and take spirit photography, but it has something to do with them as well. You know, somehow. I'm not exactly sure. That's a possibility anyway. So these spontaneous openings to mediumship can happen through accidents and trauma, definitely. A lot of people I've spoken to in the UFO field, and some people who've had near-death experiences, when they were children, they had a lot of trauma, abuse, verbal, physical, emotional abuse, through illnesses, and I'll get onto this later, but you know, shamans are born through illness as well, and a lot of shamans are mediums. So near-death experiences, people have close encounters, the death of a loved one. It seems to be that something, which I guess would come under trauma for some people, seems to open a portal to these paranormal phenomena starting in their life. But I think what happens is that the portal is the person. They get switched on. They become potentiated in those abilities. Sometimes it can happen with a new baby. And I found with myself, I had a huge change after I had a child. My personality changed, the colours that I wore, the patterns that I wore, everything. A lot of things about me changed after I had a child. And healing experiences, like I was talking before about that experience with where I saw that dead family member. and a whole lot of other things too. So spontaneous mediumship experiences, or SMEs, which is something that which is what we're talking about, include peak Indarian experiences. Now, I'm just going to have a quick look here. Peak Indarian apparitional experiences refer to a class of experiences where a percipient, an individual, encounters deceased persons who are not known at the time to be dead. And I've briefly spoken about some of these experiences in the past, okay? And I've got a clip of someone that we interviewed that will talk about that. Oh, that's exactly what I should have read it there. I read my own slide. Okay, so they didn't know that the person was dead at the time when they were interacting with them. And the term comes from this book by, what's her name, Frances Power Cobb, Peak Indarian, and she's wrote books about the paranormal. And it comes from, it's a metaphor actually, for describing the surprise of the Spaniards who, upon climbing a peak in Darien, in what's now called Panama, expected to see a continent laid out before them, but were faced instead with another ocean. So it's a metaphor for an unexpected view, which caught on, and that describes surprising visions of the dead or dying. Now, Cobb, I don't know when she wrote that, but 1882 she wrote that book, so she collected stories then. So there are three types of peak Indarian experiences where the deceased person seen was thought by the experiencer to be alive. Person seen had died immediately before the vision, and the deceased person seen was unknown to the experiencer. And I've got some examples of that here. Now, with deceased persons in the number one, okay, where deceased persons were seen was thought by experience to be alive. Cobb describes a woman who, as she was dying, suddenly showed joyful surprise and spoke of seeing three of her brothers who had long been dead. She then apparently recognised a fourth brother who was believed by everyone present to be still living in India. And one of those bystanders was so shocked by the fourth brother being seen that she rushed half senseless from the room. But sometime thereafter, letters arrived announcing the death of the brother in India, which had occurred prior to his dying sister recognising him. In another 19th century example, psychologist Edmund Gurney and classical scholar F.W.H. Myers reported the case of two brothers, ages 3 and 4, who died of scarlet fever on successive days. And Harry, the younger brother, died on November 2, and David, the older brother, died 14 miles away on November 3. And David's family took care to keep him from knowing about Harry's death, and they felt sure that he didn't know. Nevertheless, about an hour before he died, David sat up in bed, pointing, and said distinctly, "There is little Harry calling to me." So, and then Gurney and Myers also described the case of John Elkin Ogle, who an hour before he died saw his brother, who had died 16 years earlier, calling him by name. And Ogle then called out in surprise, "George Hanley," the name of a casual acquaintance in a village 40 miles away. And he called that out just before he died. And his mother, who was visiting from Hanley's village, then confirmed that Hanley had died 10 days earlier, a fact that no one else in the room had known. So they're seeing people, or they seem to be seeing people who they thought had died. Now, this is a experience that we actually recorded Nikki. Now, Marie, I think that was the conference where I saw you.
Yes.
Down the first conference in Sydney. Right.
Yes.
And actually Nikki told Barry Eaton a very interesting story, so he got her up on stage and got her to tell it, and we thought, wow, that's really interesting, we've got to get this on camera. So afterwards we got her to tell the story again. So this is the story. And it's very interesting.
Hi, my name is Nikki Myers. I'm co-founder of Whisper, West Sydney Paranormal Research. Last night we had a Whisper event at the Hero of Waterloo, a little hotel down in the Rocks. During the course of the evening we had a dinner break, and upstairs is where we had the function in a tiny little room. It was only about 35 of us, so it was really quite intimate and lovely. And a gentleman walked into the room. He kind of was a little bit out of place, which is why we noticed him, yeah? To me, he looked lighter, and I don't know if that psychologically, because we were all dressed in black, it was dark, but I noticed it was the owner of the facility. I'd met him a few times previously, a few years ago, and I commented to one of my teammates, oh look, you know, it's the owner, he's come all the way up here to just check out how the event's going. You know, he's really supportive about the paranormal, so it's really cool that he kind of made the effort to come up all these steps to just see how it was going. Funnily enough, he actually said to my girlfriend's father, you know, how's it going? You enjoying the evening? He shook his hand and disappeared, right? That was the end of that. The end of the night, we were outside at the cars just packing up, and everyone was ready to go, and I said to my partner and founder, Craig, I said, wasn't that great that the owner came up, you know, to have a look at how the event was going? And Craig goes, she? I said, no, he. It was Ivan. And Craig just said, no, Nick, he died a couple of years ago. I said, no, right, no way. Another one of our team members, Jared, he'd also seen him and said, no, mate, he walked in, it was definitely there. We saw him. The historian had actually had a photograph of what he looked like. So she pulled out the photo, and oh my God, he had the same outfit on that he had in the photo that we'd seen, you know, a little while beforehand. So I rang the girl that I was talking to, whose father had shaken the hand. And I'd said to Chloe, do you want to have a look on the website? I told her the story. Said, when I get off the phone, have a look on the website, show the photo to your dad, see if it's the same man that he saw. 2 seconds later, she rang me back and she said, oh my goodness, Nick, yep, it's Ivan. You know, that was the man he spoke to. And while that was going on, Craig had gone to check with the the guys closing up at the hotel, you know, how long Ivan had been passed away for. And one of the workers turned around and said, "Mate, that's funny you should ask that. It was 2 years tonight." Now, my girlfriend's father, he freaked out, had to pull over. He was driving in a total state of shock. We're still trying to kind of make sense of it. I'm still getting goosebumps now even talking about it. It was just totally surreal. And it just goes to show that it doesn't have to be really loud and noisy for it to be a paranormal experience. It's just these really subtle, beautiful energies, and we could have missed it. It just could have missed it if I hadn't have just made that comment to Craig. We would have missed the whole thing and not realised that we'd actually, had such an experience. And for Chloe's dad, who was very sceptical, he's now got his own really cool ghost story, and has certainly opened his eyes to what his daughter does now in our after hours and what we do as a team. So it's great. Just was really blessed. We're really blessed. Cool.
If you want to watch that again, that's on our Strange Encounters Down Under channel. Yeah. But isn't that amazing? That is just fantastic. Not only, here's this person, he walked among them, this deceased person walked among the group who was seen by a handful of people, or a few of them, shook the hand of somebody else, and they had evidence that he was dead 2 years to the day.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the most amazing evidence for something. I'm not going to say the afterlife. I would suggest it might be, but for something that we don't understand, that our science doesn't understand. Even paranormal people cannot explain it. Paranormal investigators can't.
The skeptic would say we might have faked his death.
I would love for a skeptic to comment on that, because I would like them to explain it to me, how that can actually happen, And the similar sorts of things happen to people who have near-death experiences, veridical near-death experiences, where they will die, say they've in an accident or an operation or something, and they will go to the other side, go down the tunnel, meet a spirit being or meet someone, something, and access information that they cannot know in the ordinary life. And I think I've spoken before about, or may have, some years ago when Tino was on the paranormal panel on Radio 4BC, one of the cases was a caller called in and said to him, told him the story that he had a near-death experience, and while he was out of his body, he communicated with his dead brother, who the parents had never told him he had a dead brother. Never. So, and he got information from them. When he came back and he was okay, he spoke to the parents about it, and the parents said, "How on earth did you know that? Because we were never going to tell you about that person, But they knew. Okay, so spontaneous mediumship experiences occur spontaneously, okay? The living person can sense the presence of a deceased person. The discarnate is less likely a loved one, surprisingly. Often people will see someone who's deceased, and that being has appeared to that person because they want to get some information to somebody else. And sometimes that can be because they can't get through to that somebody else, so they'll appear to someone who can be that medium for them. It's related to spontaneous after-death communication. I don't know why I put that there. The discarnate conveys message for the SME to convey to another living person, known or unknown to the SME. And the SME is not a recipient then, they change their role. They become the medium for communication between the dead and the living, because a lot of mediums will give information to people who have some connection with that deceased person. But in spontaneous ones, they don't necessarily. So among various studies that have been done, there's a connection, it seems to be a connection between spontaneous mediumship and near-death experiences, like I was saying before. And among surveyed near-death experiences, 55 to 89% report an increase in psychic phenomena or healing abilities following their NDEs. And with my own experience, when I had a near-death experience, after that, or following that, was where I started to get abilities that I didn't particularly want. You know, I started to know things about people which I didn't really want to know. And I didn't pursue it, so I didn't develop it. And as I got well over a 10-year period, those things disappeared, and that's okay for me, because I think that sometimes I see people who pursue these abilities and think it's wonderful, but actually it has a huge responsibility to have those abilities, to be able to communicate with the dead, to be able to know things about people and you're not seeking them, to be able to get a good night's sleep. As I asked Glenys one day, how do you get a good night's sleep with all these beings? And she said, I just tell them to off. You know, to go away and leave me alone. I need my sleep. You know, so it's not everything that people think it is.
My husband had an NDE a few years ago now, and prior to that, he was always very accepting and very supportive of my beliefs and what I do and what I work in, and but that was, you know, that was my stuff really. He had an NDE. He was very sick. He had a cerebral hemorrhage, and thankfully he's made a really good recovery, which he swears is due to, you know, all sorts of healing that the doctors weren't able to offer him. But since that NDE, it's completely opened him up to all sorts of beliefs and possibilities, and we sit down and talk now, and he says to me now, he says, you do realise if anybody was listening to us and they could hear what we were saying, he said, we'd both be carted off, you know. But he's completely open now, so, and has experiences himself, which he never had before, or at least he didn't recognise having before.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when I hear people say things like, you know, the medical professionals, mental health medical professionals, that is, if they hear what we're saying, that they, you know, they might want to wrap us in a straitjacket. It still comes as a shock to me. I don't know why that we still have that. Those people have that mentality. I'll just finish off on this study that was done by Dr. Jan Holden. I think it was done in 2014, and there were 89 participants, and they were predominantly female. 15% reported one spontaneous mediumship experience prior to their NDE, but 56% reported one following an NDE. So there's that measured increase in those experiences after a near-death experience. And this is where I picked the subject, the title of today, which is Death Opening the Doors of Perception, because something happens to people, not everyone, but almost everyone. Something happens to people who have a near-death experience, and suddenly, you ever hear, what was that book, the Day My Head Opened Up or something, can't quite, Terence McKenna, was it? Or something like that. But anyway, it's almost like that. Suddenly, whatever has been keeping the mind in a particular parameter, those parameters just soften and melt away, and these other things start to happen for them. And I find that really interesting. And the near-death experience is probably the most profound experience that people can have, which stimulates a lot of and catalyses a lot of these abilities that we all have, and they kick into play. Deeper NDEs report one post-NDE, all these acronyms, it's terrible, isn't it? Spontaneous mediumship experience with a medium effect. Post-NDE SMEs range from 1 to 20 experiences. So, and distressful SMEs, spontaneous mediumship experiences, were 4% and 28% sought help. So not everyone's coping with these experiences, basically, and this is just a way to show you of the increase in those experiences for people that it occurred. What I think might happen is that between dimensions, that people talk about these tunnels that open up, right, and they go down the tunnel and they see the light. I actually think that those tunnels are actually a part of the infrastructure of an esoteric, non-physical structure that we don't understand. Because even in consciousness, to be in some place and in another place, there needs to be some sort of vehicle or some sort of tool to get us there. I don't think that we die, we blink out of here and blink into something else like that with a new place. If we get into talking about resonance, then there has to be a mechanical process that shifts us from one dimension to another. And I do wonder whether when people have near-death experiences and there are other dimensions, if you can do it like this, between those dimensions, regardless of whether they're right here, I think that those tunnels, which in my experience was like a vortice, are almost like a wormhole that goes into another dimension. But it may not be a wormhole or a portal in the way we understand it. We're talking about an esoteric, what we call esoteric science, but I think it is science, the structure, the physics of structure of the universe. I don't think that the universe sort of blobs around as a big nebulous blob and there's no formation in it. I think that there is something there, but we don't understand it. We're only just starting to think about those things when we explore dark matter. So I do think that eventually our science will understand other dimensions. Probably not going to happen for a few 100,000 years yet, but a few hundred years anyway. But I do think from the reports that people have given me about close encounters that there certainly is some sort of knowledge of advanced physics that these non-human intelligences do understand. So I think we can understand it, we just don't understand.
Do you find that abductees come back with enhanced psychic abilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And we were listening on Gaia TV to Hank Wesselman, who's a Western shaman but has studied shamanism with various indigenous groups for decades. And he was saying that a French researcher hooked him up to something and measured his brainwave activity because he was a deep meditator as well. So he did that, and the researcher found that he had brainwaves that went way beyond the spectrum of what ordinary long-term researchers do for some reason, but because he meditated and undertook shamanic journeys. He said he had only seen those frequencies repeated in people who had alien abduction experiences. So what does that mean? I don't know. But it's something to think about too. Just want to talk about shamans and spontaneous mediumship experiences. Some of you will know a bit about shamanism, and generally the way that people become shamans is they'll have a near-death experience, and the most powerful shamans are struck by lightning and survive, and they are revered as the kahunas of their practice. And but they can also have it through an illness too. I think I've got, no, I haven't got that. Okay. They can have what they call a shamanic illness, and this is where they can have a prolonged illness where they will have these spontaneous mediumship experiences, and they will see the spirits, and the spirits will call them and they'll tell them things that they have to learn and they have to know. And the classic shamanic initiation experiences where something happens, whether it's an accident, a near-death experience, an illness, and there are other ways to become a shaman, but these are the classic ways. And you are symbolically dragged off by the spirits, separated from your tribe. You have experiences. The spirits tell you things. You have a dismemberment experience where you are pulled apart literally, stripped of all identity, where you can, where when you're being rebuilt, organs in your body will be replaced by crystals or stones, rocks that are found in the river, whatever, but symbolically, I'm not talking literally, and you're put back together, and then you return to your tribe and you teach the tribe what you experienced, or the things that you learned during your experience. That's a classic shamanic initiation experience. And you can see how that could be very similar to someone who's had a near-death experience, right? And those shamans will have these mediumship abilities. They'll become psychic, they'll know stuff, they'll be able to do medical intuition, or scan a person's body and just know what's wrong with it, or they'll just know what's wrong with them as soon as they walk through the door. And they can also, they will journey to help these people heal. And the way that you can tell, there are people who do shamanic practices like Barry and I, and we're not shamans, but people who are shamans do all their work in the non-physical realms, all of it in the non-physical realms. And so they will journey to ask the spirits what that person needs for healing. They will journey when the land is going through drought or something like that, and they'll journey to the spirit of the land and try to communicate them to try and get the spirit of the land to change the conditions of the land, so that the weather patterns will change and they'll have rain, or and the grass will grow, all that sort of thing. They'll journey for so many different things. And I did a journey once for the spirit of Jindalee, because this is all very Aboriginal around here. Most of the streets have Aboriginal names. And when I did a journey to meet the spirit of Jindalee, this really wizened old Aboriginal person appeared to me in the journey, and he was very abrupt and rude, actually. And I said, "What can I do to help the land?" The area, and I can't quite remember it all now because I wrote it down at the time, but at the end of it I said, well, I want to help, and to help the community, to help heal the land, whatever that people have done while they've been here. And he told me about how the river, the energy of the river had changed when ships started to go up and down, so the energy lines in the ship became fractured, and that split off through the land, and it fractured the land. And I said, well, what can I do? And in the end, I said, well, I'll see what I can do, whatever. And he turns around and just sort of very in an offhand way went, we'll see. And as he walked off, he left white footprints on the ground.
Wow.
Ah.
And that was a really interesting journey. And Barry had an interesting journey too, to Ayers Rock, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, similar sort of that sort of thing.
White footprints on the rock as well.
On the rock, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the sort of work that you do in shamanic practices. You journey to the spirits of things, because all things seem to be alive with their own spirit. And you communicate with them. In a way, you become a medium, although we're not channeling spirits, but we're communicating with spirits to bring peace, harmony, and to see what spirits will collaborate and what ones won't. And if they won't collaborate, what deals can we make with them, what treaties can we make with them, so that they will at least work with us, basically. Okay, so and so the shamans, they have, and I know some. We're going to visit a couple of friends of mine who are down in the border ranges, live out in the middle of Whoop Whoop, but they have UFO sightings all the time. And I knew from the moment that I met this fellow when he was 18, well, he's now 40 something, that I knew he was a shaman. I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew he was a shaman. And he would never call himself that, but he has become one. And he never says he does shamanic practice, but he has become one. I can see it. These shamans have all these abilities after their initiation experiences, and in the Western world, we don't know what to do with that, because they don't have that context to put it in. Something called psychopomps, and psychopomp work, I should say, because all shamans do this work, and I've done some of it in my training. But they act as guides of souls as they travel from life to death. And they also work with people, the deceased, who've become stuck and they haven't moved on. So in that way, they're certainly doing a lot of mediumship work, right? And they will journey to meet the spirits of those people and to help them move on. And one experience I had was where I journeyed to meet this fellow who this friend of his was concerned that he hadn't moved on. They had a feeling that he was stuck, that and things weren't going right. A few things were going strange around the house after his passing, and she felt that there was some sort of something that wasn't right with his passing. So I did a journey and I met him, and interesting enough, as I was travelling towards him through this countryside, the countryside was made of pop-up books. A tree would like pop up out of a pop-up book, or and there were no houses or people like that, nothing. But the landscape was coming to me as pop-ups like that. And then I saw him, and then I saw behind him in the distance there was, while I was looking at him and saying, "I'm here, what do you need?" In the distance, this, I guess you'd say, like a round doorway like this, but it was like a golden one. It was shiny, and it appeared in the background again as a pop-up, but it was glowing. And I thought, oh, that's where he needs to go. So I just looked at him and I went like this, and he turns around and he comes back and he goes, "Thanks," like this, and he walks off through the doorway. So when I came out of the journey, I told his friend about this, and she said, "Oh God, that's so him," because he did this thing all the time, and he also was very dedicated to his children, and he would read them lots of stories. So to me, that was a connection with him, with his children, and perhaps there was something to do with his children that he needed to smooth, so he felt he could actually go, that sort of thing. You know, so I don't know, but it was, you know, it was the concern of his friend who just had a feeling that things just weren't settled. So that was that particular experience. So you know, shamans do that. They work with people if there's hauntings, if there's poltergeist activity or whatever, but to need to settle the spirits. And shamans, and this is where we get into resonance, they rearrange energy. They rearrange energy. They don't get rid of it, they rearrange it so that it's in the way that it should be. It fits into that sort of keyhole the proper way. And I think this is what happens when you have disturbances, is the energy gets disturbed. It's disorganised rather than being arranged in the proper template that it should be arranged in. Because in shamanic practice, you're working with the understanding that everything has spirit. The space between Ethne and me, there is spirit and there is energy. It is packed with information, and we can access that information. Some people will call that accessing the Akashic records, where energy imprints are stored, and there is nothing in the universe that has any space in it. It is just packed with energy at that quantum level. And the same with consciousness, which Barry always talks about. There is a quantum consciousness, an intelligence that goes through the universe at a quantum level, and something happens in that where I think these experiences are like having a near-death experience, for example, which causes an eruption, and then we move through it, and then we have this new input into our own resonance, and it changes us. So that's my pathetic little interpretation of what they were talking about in a simplified manner. You know, I'm sure you've heard other descriptions of something like that, but it was interesting for me to see that in physics that there is something that could explain how those things happen. And I think in the future that our science will come to understand that a lot more, and then we'll be able to, and these things won't be so woo, right? Woo. And we'll say, no, you know, there's something to this. And there are scientists who are studying these things, as I'm sure you're aware, and have been for a long time. And certainly in Russia they have been. Huge parapsychological associations full of scientists studying these sorts of things. So my understanding was that perhaps these mediums dial up these different wavelengths in some way, that they somehow, you know, inadvertently, because we're talking about spontaneous experiences and unconscious mediums, how they dial up various wavelengths according to their experiences, their own shifting consciousness as well too. And there is writing about in shamanic practices that, or in many Eastern traditions too, that if you don't have a teacher but you're ready to go up to the next level, that spirit will come to you and teach you directly. Right? You don't need a master teacher to teach you, it will teach you directly. And that's the whole point of why I like shamanic practices, because it's direct experience with spirit. Because I don't teach anyone anything, spirit teaches them, I just facilitate the journeys for them. Yeah. So it's spooky action at a distance, basically. This the dance of energy and the dance of experience, and yeah. What can I say? And I think that I think this is the last slide actually, I think that when you know, we have say we have people have experiences over here, and those experiences arise within them something, okay, and they come out here, and the non-physical realm comes to meet them. I think there might also be something in the thought that because the universe, because of this quantum field, the intelligence in the quantum understands when this arises, and it arises on the other side to meet them in this borderland world here, perhaps. So that's my thinking for today.
Yes, you've done a lot of thinking.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.